It's not every day that we get footage from multiple angles showing the elimination of one of the world's most wanted terrorists. So, guess today's your lucky day. Today we're going to run through the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, and we have a special guest, Joe Truzman of Foundation for Defense of Democracies, chiming in to add some context to this whole issue. Joe actually lays out a path to how the killing of Sinwar could directly lead to more hostages coming home and possibly the end of the war in Gaza. It's worth considering. So Sinwar, Hamas's top leader in Gaza, was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces on October 16, 2024, during a ground operation in Rafah, the southern portion of the Gaza Strip. The operation unfolded as Israeli soldiers were actually on a pretty routine patrol. This wasn't some targeted special operations raid, just standard grunt work. Anyways, the soldiers noticed suspicious activity in the area and used a drone to spot 3 militants leaving the building. The soldiers opened fire, causing the militants to scatter, with Sinwar retreating alone into a nearby building. Again, remember they don't know it's him. At this point, to the IDF soldiers on the ground, it's just 3 Hamas militants. So a short firefight then kicked off where Sinwar resisted by throwing grenades at advancing Israeli troops, forcing them to retreat temporarily and revert to different means of finding a way to eliminate this threat. The IDF troops sent up a drone to survey the building's interior and discovered that a lone militant was injured but still alive and posed a threat to advancing Israeli forces. The troops then called in a tank strike that ripped through the room where this lone militant was located, clearly eliminating the threat, and Israeli forces then continued their mission through Rafah. As far as they were concerned, it was just another day coming into contact with Hamas militants. Then the following day, IDF forces re-entered the building and, to their surprise, found Sinwar's body. Now, he was pretty beat up. His arm was severely mangled. He had multiple wounds that could have been fatal, including what may have been a gunshot wound to the head. That did raise some questions on if it was the tank strike or small arms fire that actually ended up killing Sinwar. Now, his identity was pretty quickly confirmed through DNA testing and dental records, which Israel had on hand because they had provided him medical treatment while he was previously detained, which is a pretty wild turn of events if you think about it. So a lot of people right now, understandably so, focus on Sinwar's role in the planning and execution of the October 7th massacre. I think that's pretty well documented, but not nearly as many people know just how brutal he was to his own neighbors and the people he was supposed to be leading, his fellow Palestinians inside of Gaza. So in his early days in Hamas, Sinwar was the head of internal security and intelligence services responsible for rooting out suspected collaborators with Israel. It was during this time that he oversaw a brutal campaign against Palestinians accused, but not proven, and that's important, of providing intelligence to Israel. Many of these accused collaborators were tortured and some were executed, often without any sort of trial. Then again, during Israel's war with Gaza in 2014, Hamas, under Sinwar's influence, executed over 20 Palestinians, again accused of collaborating with Israel. Many were reportedly tortured before being publicly shot, particularly in northern Gaza City. Then, after becoming the leader of Hamas in Gaza in 2017, Sinwar continued to suppress dissent within Gaza. There have been numerous reports of Hamas security forces arresting, torturing, and beating Palestinian activists, journalists, and members of rival political factions. So, not a good dude. I think we can just leave it at that. Now, right away, reactions on his killing were pretty mixed. Personally, I think Chris Cappy of Task and Purpose nailed it when he said, quote, "I'm glad Yahya Sinwar lived long enough to see Hezbollah's entire leadership get killed," end quote, which was, very thoughtful for Chris to put that out there. However, plenty of others have been presenting Sinwar as a martyr, kind of suggesting he decided to die for the cause and stepped out into the battle to go down in a blaze of glory fighting against Israeli forces. That's probably not what happened here, though, and Joe Truzman isn't really buying it either.
Listen, if you're the leader of a terrorist organization, that's going to be one of your staples, right? That's what you're going to say. I want to be a martyr. I want to be a shaheed. I want to die fighting. However, in this case, the way he died, you can look at it a couple different ways, right? I'm sure you saw the drone footage and everything. He's throwing the stick. He wasn't there because he wanted to be there. I think he was forced to be out in the open. And again, he got caught at the wrong time by the Israelis. So, he wanted to be a martyr, I think, but I don't think that's the way he wanted to go out.
However, that does raise the question of what exactly was Sinwar doing above ground? I mean, we've long expected Sinwar to be deep in the tunnels of Gaza, likely surrounded by hostages to protect him from Israeli raids or airstrikes. In fact, that's one of the reasons so many people thought his death couldn't be real. There was no way Sinwar was caught out in the open above ground like this. But in fact, the reason he was eliminated in this way is directly a result of Israeli operations in Gaza, specifically Rafah.
I think what happened here is that Sinwar was on the move the whole time because the Israeli military was literally on top of him. So it got to a point where in southern Gaza, the Israeli military got so close to him that he had to move, right? He had to get out of those tunnels. He had no other choice here. So this is where I think what happened here, what I believe what happened here is that he was essentially forced to get out of the tunnels and be above ground. And that's where the Israelis got him.
You know what? I should have done this earlier. That was Joe Truzman, an analyst for Foundation of Defense of Democracies and an editor at the Long War Journal. Joe focuses on Palestinian armed groups in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as Iranian proxy forces across the Middle East. So, yeah, he's kind of an expert on this stuff, and it's awesome to get his insight here. All right, so there's a few big questions now that Sinwar is dead that are worth getting into. First, who's going to replace him? And second, what does this mean for the war going forward? Look, I don't know who needs to hear this, but did you know you can essentially wager if the United States has effectively deterred the Houthis from attacks in the Red Sea? Yeah, that's a real option. Kalshi is a legal exchange where you can trade or bet on any number of events. In fact, they just got approval to list markets to trade on the outcome of the election, making it the first legal place to do so in 100 years. You can wager on all sorts of stuff here. Of course, the U.S. presidential election is front and center right now, but there's actually a few that might actually resonate with you all. To clarify, no, you can't wager or bet on who's going to win a specific war or who the next leader of Hamas will be. Yes, I looked, but check this one out. With the Yemen-based Houthis slinging missiles and drones at nearly every ship that passes by, there's only a 12% chance that Maersk resumes shipping in the Red Sea by the end of the year. So if you're optimistic, maybe think that the recent U.S. B-2 strikes had a real and lasting impact, you can wager $20 to win $136 on that specific event. It's a way for you to trade on current events, which is pretty interesting. Look, Kalshi has already facilitated over $1 billion in trades. You can sign up using my link in the description below, and the first 500 traders who use code Preston and deposit $50 will get a free $20 credit. Now, before getting into either one of those, I do want to be sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves. Hamas is still very much active in the Gaza Strip. I mean, there's more than 100 hostages that remain in Hamas captivity, and every day they continue to release footage of their forces, Hamas forces, attacking Israeli soldiers. This isn't over yet.
Hamas took a blow, but it's not, Hamas isn't eliminated. And I think that's a good point to make. Hamas is still around and will likely be around after the war is over.
Now, the who replaces Sinwar question is tough because, quite frankly, Israel has killed just about everybody who could have been considered a viable next man up. I mean, the bench is getting pretty short, if you will. When getting into the replacement question, I asked Joe if Sinwar was known to be training any successors that could quickly take his place. I mean, all of these organizations know that their leadership is being targeted and could be taken out any day, so you have to think that they're preparing for that eventuality so that the organization could continue to function. Maybe not.
I don't think Sinwar was necessarily grooming anyone. And if he was, let's say, for this type of leadership position, they're probably dead, to be quite honest with you. At least the ones in Gaza. There's Dave, there's Isa, and there's some other commanders as well that may have been able to take over, right? At least lead in Gaza. But I haven't seen any evidence.
So again, there's just not a lot of successors to choose from. In fact, Joe made a great point saying that the next leader of Hamas probably won't come from Gaza at all.
I think when Hamas chooses an overall leader for the organization, I think they'll learn from their mistake when picking Sinwar. I think they're going to choose someone that's going to be that lives abroad. Essentially, it's not in Gaza because listen, you can't have a leader that has the military on top of you 24/7 trying to find you. You can't effectively run Hamas that way. You can't run an organization that way. You got to remember, it's not only the military thing. You have to do things like raise funds, for example, right? Go to other countries, go to allied countries to just build up that relationship, right? So, and Sinwar couldn't do that. He was stuck in Gaza. He was stuck in a tunnel, and then at the end, he was killed. So, I think they're going to pick somebody that's again outside of Gaza, but you never know. The Hamas and its partners in Iran, especially, may choose somebody that nobody's really thought of yet. But we'll see. But they may even do it in secret too, just to make sure the Israelis don't know who's the leader, at least temporarily.
So it's safe to assume that Hamas will choose another leader, even if they don't make a public statement. There will be somebody in charge of the overall organization. Additionally, Hamas, as of now, appears willing and ready to continue the fight. So let's turn to what Sinwar's death could mean for the war going forward. Bottom line, this could be good news for the hostages. I'm always nervous to throw that out there because there's so many families waiting on anything to change on that front, but there has been a lot released recently about how Sinwar was likely an impediment to any sort of hostage negotiation deal. In fact, let's go to Joe for a more thorough explanation here.
I think it can affect the outcome of the war, specifically the ceasefire negotiations, right? I think Israel, the United States, and other countries involved here may have seen Sinwar as an obstacle, right? I mean, if you read some of the reports just after Sinwar was killed, Sinwar was essentially just holding out because he viewed that Israel was, or that rather that the United States was pressuring Israel, and that there was a lot of discontent within Israeli society, pressuring the Israeli government to, let's do a ceasefire now. We have to get the hostages back, which is understandable, of course. But so he was holding out, right? And now that obstacle has been eliminated, or Sinwar has been eliminated, I think this is the correct move here as well. I think all the parties involved will try to get a ceasefire going, or at least something smaller, right? Kind of like what we saw late November and December, where there was a small swap, right? Anyway, I think that the obstacle is removed, and I think it is a good time to at least try to negotiate a ceasefire here, right? Possibly an end to the war. It just depends. But Hamas says that it's not going to change Sinwar. What Sinwar was a Sinwar strategy, essentially, right? To hold out. But saying one thing to the public doesn't necessarily mean that's your intention, right? So I think Hamas will listen here. But we'll see what happens in the next weeks or days, possibly.
Now, I can understand the counterpoint of why would one man's death prompt any sort of real change in this war? We didn't really see that with Deif or Haniyeh, so why is it now on the table with Sinwar? That's valid, and while Hamas is likely to persist as an organization, there's no doubt they're feeling significant pressure, and some in the organization may be looking for a way out.
Hamas, whether they're not going to say this publicly, but their existence in Gaza is being threatened, right? Like never before. That's the problem here. So I think they have incentive to do something, okay, to push for a ceasefire or to negotiate a ceasefire, especially now that Sinwar's gone. You got to remember, and you said it before, their leadership in Gaza decimated. I mean, there's only a few of them left, right? Especially these commanders. And so it's the group needs to survive here. So they got to figure out, they got to strategize. Okay, how are we going to survive here? Do we just keep fighting and we're going to just keep losing people, right? Or are we going to negotiate a ceasefire that will maybe keep us somewhat in power, or at least keep us in Gaza? So there's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot to negotiate.
Throughout our experience, the U.S. experience in the global war on terror, we didn't often see an immediate impact, the killing of senior leaders of al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Islamic State, or others. But what's happening to Hamas is different. We would go months, sometimes even years, between striking key targets, which allowed the organization time to regroup and reorganize. They were also relatively dispersed, so it was pretty hard to immediately leverage any short-term gap in their, unexpected leadership turnover. With Hamas in Gaza, they've lost essentially all of their senior leadership inside of a year, with their top three being taken out in just the last 3 months. When you look at how much experience those guys had, many who had been with the organization from the start, it's very, very hard to make that all up in short order. So Sinwar's death presents another opportunity for Israel to finish the war on favorable terms, get the hostages home, and reduce, if not eliminate entirely, Hamas's military capabilities. It's entirely possible that the death of Sinwar marks the turning point towards the end of this war, or at least the war in Gaza. But that's all I got for now. Thank you to Joe Truzman for sharing his thoughts on the subject, and you can find Joe's information in the description below. Thank you as well to Kalshi for sponsoring today's video. Be sure to check out the link in the description where the first 500 people to use my link get $20 in free credit when they deposit $50. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.